Does agriculture have a bee problem? And if we have a bee problem, can technology fix it? That's what we're talking about in this episode of the Business of Agriculture. Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of the Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well. But what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't. But you can now figure that out with Pattern Ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field, then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. I've got a great topic for you today because you know what? If you are where I am in Indiana, you've heard about bee colony collapse. You've heard about there being a problem with pollination, but you really don't know that you're going to feel the effect of it. It's corn and bean country. This is a problem for California, just like water and legislation. Well, I'm not sure that that's the case because you know what? I did some research on this. Bees pollinate 75% of all the food that we eat. That's kind of a big deal. And if we have a bee problem, it's going to be a problem. All the predictions about us starving and overpopulating, as you've heard on my show, I don't fall for any of it. We absolutely, productive capacity and our ability to evolve in agriculture has outpaced our ability to repopulate. We are amazing at production. But there's this one little thing that we're not in charge of. It's not about tractors, it's not about GMOs, it's not about genetics, it's not about drought tolerance. It's about these insects. And if we have a problem that there aren't enough of them or that they're going away, first off, is that a real problem? Secondly, what's that mean for us? Well, I've got a guy out here who's going to help us dig into the bee problem and tell us all those and more, answers to all those questions and more. His name is Itai Kanot. He's with a company called BeeHero. They've got headquarters in Israel, California, and they've also got facilities in Australia. And I'm like, this is a great thing because for several hundred episodes, I've been thinking about this bee thing every time I read about it. And I'm like, boom, I've come across you. Itai, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. I guess let's just go ahead and start off. Overview of the topic. Is there a bee problem? And before we do that, I want you, because somebody might say, well, who's this guy? You're not an entomologist. You're not with the government. You are in private enterprise, and you came from an agricultural background. So give me a little bit about that, and we'll address the bee problem.
Right. So again, my name is Itai. I'm originally a commercial beekeeper. My family owns the largest beekeeping operation in Israel. So I grew up around bees, essentially for as long as I can remember. Since I started walking, I was working in the apiary and around bees. My family also farms, so I have quite a lot of experience with farming, specifically apples, peaches, pomegranates, and so. Yeah, this was kind of a natural transition for me as I was working more and more with my family in the family business, and I was kind of taking the vector of taking over the family business at some point.
Itai, there's, obviously most of my listeners are going to be Canadian and United States, North American audience, and we hear about Israel usually from a completely different perspective. We hear about it from the situation, the military, all that. But there's agriculture in a small country, but there's agriculture over there and a pretty specialized agriculture. I mean, I know an irrigation company that is Israeli, Netafim. And there's some real specialized and advanced agriculture. So when you talk about the beekeeping background, you're not talking about you had like a hive on your back patio. I mean, you're talking about this is legit modern agriculture like you'd see in California, right?
Absolutely. It's a commercial operation. My family owns about 5,000 hives. It's not as big as some of the guys out here in the U.S., obviously. but 5,000 hives is considered a very commercial operation here as well.
And most of the stuff you're covering, because you're not growing corn and soybeans in Israel. That's more specially cropped. There's a demand more for the beekeeping to pollinate, correct?
So there is a lot of corn in Israel as well, actually, for dairy farms and for eating. But yeah, I guess agriculture in Israel is different, but is extremely diverse. I think there's basically almost everything being grown in Israel. So it is pretty interesting. A lot of it needs pollination, some of it doesn't. But I guess very similar to what you see all over the world.
So you come from that background. Here you are with this company. Are you one of the founders of BeeHero?
Yes, I am one of the founders. We're 3 founders currently in the company, and yes, I'm one of them.
Okay, so let's go into the issue. You founded it for a reason. We'll get to that in a little bit, the founding and the company and all what you do. But the main thing is there a bee problem? You've been in the bee business. You've been internationally in the bee business. You've been internationally in agriculture business ventures. Do we have a bee problem?
So we do have a bee problem, but luckily we also have beekeepers that takes care of us essentially. Over the past decade or two, what we've seen is an increasing issue with hive mortality, bee mortality, essentially. Bees are dying very, very rapidly, something that would not be acceptable in any other industry. We're talking about numbers of 45, 50% yearly of the bee population dying. If something like that would happen with cattle, I think it would be a national crisis immediately. But
real quickly, you said a big percentage of the bees are dying, but they obviously all die because everything has its mortality rate over time. Is the issue that not that bees are dying sooner than they should, right?
Yeah. So I'll give you something to compare to, right? A natural bee mortality rate would be at around 15%, 10-15%. Depends on the year because the weather and whatnot can also affect it. But yeah, we're looking at numbers way higher than that. 45, 50. Some years it can be even higher than that.
Okay, so instead of 15%, we're seeing 50% on bee mortality. And so if the bees are dying, that means we obviously have less of them because it's not like, they're just having faster life cycles. So are there fewer bees globally right now? Are there fewer honeybees globally today than there were a decade ago?
Yes. When you're talking about commercial beekeeping, you do have the beekeepers and they're able to reproduce hives, right? So a 10,000 hives beekeeper might lose 5,000 of them during the year, but they will also reproduce 5,000 of them so that they still keep the 10,000 figure, right? Feral hives don't have a beekeeper to look after them. And with those, yes, they are slowly disappearing because there's nobody to take care of them. So we do need to look at the difference. The bees that are used mostly for commercial agriculture are bees that are owned by commercial beekeepers, right? And so they're able to keep up and maintain the hives and reproduce the hives. But you have to remember that takes a lot of efforts and resources, money to do. And we're seeing this everywhere in agriculture. We'll basically work more for less, right? It seems like every year. And it's the same for beekeepers. And at some point, if it becomes a business that is just not lucrative enough, and beekeepers are going to start taking a break or stop beekeeping, then we're going to have a real issue. So we need to be sure that the beekeepers that currently take care of the bees and their well-being are able to still make business.
I understand. So, while a lot of folks, even listening to this, that are in tune, they maybe heard about beekeeping and they think it's like a hobby. I go to the state fair and there's somebody there that in a white beekeeper suit and he's giving me honey samples. But it's an actual business, and in your family, and certainly in places like California, where semi-truck, flatbed trucks with hives on them get hauled around. I think is the case, and then they deploy them in certain areas to do the work of pollinating. That's something I didn't know until 20 or 30 years ago when I was doing agricultural work in California. So kind of educate me a little bit about that. I don't know that there's commercial beekeepers for pollination purposes outside of more of the specialty crop areas.
So there definitely are a lot of beekeepers that are focusing their business model around pollination activities. Most beekeepers are gonna be doing a bunch of different things. So it's gonna be pollination, honey, selling bees to other beekeepers, and so on. There are a few ways to make money with beekeeping, but at the moment, pollination is probably the main source of income for the majority of the beekeepers or commercial beekeepers. It's definitely a real business. It's not just a hobby. There are a lot of hobbyist beekeepers, and that's great, but it's a different type of beekeeping venture. So you said earlier about 75% of the world's largest crops or more significant crops are being pollinated and need some sort of pollination. It kind of varies. Some crops are 100% dependent on bee pollination. Some are less than 100%, which means they will still get a crop, but it'll be a very poor crop compared to when having bees. Specifically with California, California grows about 80-something%, 85%, let's call it, of the world's almonds.
Yeah. And
almonds are a good example for a crop that 100% depends on bee pollination.
Yes.
So almond growers contract with beekeepers that have to bring their bees all the way from across the country, right? They'll put them on semi-trucks and send them from Florida, from New York, from North Dakota, Idaho.
Whatever, yeah.
Some beekeepers are local in California, of course. And all those hives are going to come into California. Essentially, all the commercial hives in the U.S. come to California in January to pollinate during February and March the California almond crop. So it's a pretty amazing thing to see, actually, if you ever get the chance.
So it's a problem that we have fewer bees. Is the reason this thing called bee colony collapse that you're talking about? I want to ask about that, and you can tell me what bee colony collapse is. But I also, real quick, I want to remind our listeners about Truterra. If you are in the business of agriculture and you're looking for new revenue streams, let's say you're a farmer and you've got the ability to do some things like reduce tillage or maybe strip tillage or cover cropping, you can sign up for sustainability programs with my friends at Truterra. Truterra is focused on supporting farmers at every stage of your sustainability journey to help you maintain economic as well as agronomic practices for sustainability programs that can help you make some money. Go to TruterraAg.com. Truterra is part of Land O'Lakes. Go to TruterraAg.com to figure out more. Okay, is bee colony collapse the thing that's doing this?
So a lot of people think of bee colony collapse disorder as this one disease that just kills bees.
Okay.
But it's important to understand that it's a phenomenon. It's not a disease, okay? And there are four main vectors that are traditionally thought of as the main things that causes colony collapse, right? So the first thing would be, and I'm just saying it in a random order.
Yeah.
So first thing that I want to touch on is monoculture, right? In many areas with modern agriculture, you basically get huge plots of lands that are covered with the same crop. Even if this crop, like almonds, is good for bees, there's essentially nothing else around. The growers make sure that the ground is completely clear from any cover crops. Normally, today it changes slowly, but there's nothing around for the bees except for almonds. And bees are, just like us, we can't rely on just one food source. We have to get our food from many different sources in order to stay healthy. And it's the same for bees. And so we were basically creating an agricultural deserts. And it's not a good thing for the bees. So that's thing number one. Number two is urbanization, right? There's more and more of us people, and we need more and more houses. We need more and more urban areas that comes at the expense of just natural spaces. And so that reduces the amount of natural space for the bees to live in and to forage at, and so on. It also brings pollution, air pollution, and other things that are that can be destructive. The third thing that I'm going to touch on is pesticides. Right, we use a lot of pesticides in agriculture, many different kinds. We have the neonics that are horrible for bees.
Yes.
And other things, with corn, for example, some of the hybrid corn, if the bee go and take the corn pollen, it might still have some of those materials in that pollen that the bee bring into the colony for everyone to eat. So that's not a good thing. And then the third thing is parasites and different diseases. Okay, so essentially with global transportation and dealing and so on, we as the humankind, we moved all the different diseases and pests from one region to another. We used to have region-specific problems that the bees were good with dealing with, but now we have everything everywhere, basically, and that causes major stress to the bees. So they don't get good food resources. They don't. The food that they do get, in many cases, will have poison on it, pesticides, and then they will have a disease. It's a recipe for collapse.
Okay,
right?
So I went through there. First off, I'm gonna make sure I get this right. So the bee colony collapse is not like a disease. It's not like hoof rot for cattle. It's a phenomenon, not a disease. Understood. And then you said what is causing problems for bee populations is monoculture. And we understand that. We're really damn good at making large acreage of stuff, and that's why even the USDA has now got like these pollinator programs. Take 10 acres over here on the edge of your field. It's not very productive anyhow, and put it into a pollinator program, which has certain flower types that keep the bees going, etc. Understood that. Second one was you said us humans, we take over space, then we also emit stuff that sometimes is harmful, and one of those then being the third thing you said, pesticides. We use pesticides on our crops, and that also, when we're talking about insecticides that might kill the bees, or we might put pesticides on that the bees then come to the crop and cause them. And then the fourth thing you said was the movement of disease, the movement of parasites, or things that can, we're a global economy, we're a global agriculture, and that's on. So those are the four things that cause, in your research, that cause the bee problem.
Yep, these are the main four things that are normally thought of as the main reasons for colony collapse disorder. We can, you can dive deeper into the different smaller aspects and find other causes, but these are the four main vectors that are being used.
What about then the one that is the most easily rectified? Seems like putting in 5 acres here and there of stuff that feeds the bees. That's the easiest one. Which one has the biggest effect? In other words, which one is blamed the most? Which one's causing the worst problem for our bees?
That's a very good question. I don't think there's an agreement amongst the beekeeper community or even the researchers. I don't think there's a wide agreement on this is the main issue. Yeah. A lot of people would say that it's the insecticides and the neonics and so on. The other school will say that it's the varroa mite that is a huge problem for the bees. It's like a tick on humans, but if you compare sizes, it would be like we have a tick the size of a basketball.
Okay.
Like a tick sitting on the bee, sucking the life out of it. And also it's basically a vector for a lot of diseases. So all the different viruses and diseases that bee, the varroa is able to transmit. So these are the two things that people will fight over, which one is the most damaging.
Okay. So you've been around this your whole life. You're a little younger than me, but you're old enough to have experience. Do you have concern? Or, I mean, you started this company BeeHero because you're addressing some of this, but you're not addressing any of those four things specifically. You're addressing hive health, and I want to get into that in a second. But like, is there an actual concern of people that are more tied into this, entomologists, beekeepers, and pollination professors, if there is such a thing? Do they have a meetings and say, "Holy shit, we are 10 years away from really having a real problem"? I mean, is it that way? Because a lot of times we get very alarmist. The whole climate thing it's overdone. I don't hear that with the beekeeping. I hear that there's some concern, but there's not like dire.
Right. I do think that there's definitely a concern, and we should all be concerned about it. I think that as long as we have a functioning and dare I say thriving beekeeping industry, we will be most likely okay. Obviously, I cannot predict if there's going to be a new challenge introduced in the next few, nobody predicted COVID, or maybe some people will say they did. But if we had something like that coming, then that would be horrible. But as long as we have a functioning beekeeping industry, I think would be okay. But one of the issues is that it's becoming harder every year to stay in the beekeeping business.
Okay, so let's go with that one, because usually, it becomes indicative that there's a lot of shortage, and in shortage, if you're a pure economist, a shortage means that, hey, there's not enough bees. By God, those bees that are out there, we're going to bid up the price of them, which would then mean that if I can keep bees alive, my beekeeping skills are worth 5 times what they were, a decade ago. So what I'm trying to figure out is, if there's a shortage of bees, it seems like a beekeeper that can keep hives alive is going to be very profitable.
Yes and no. I guess, if we're talking about economy, then absolutely that works, right? You're always looking for the balance between supply and demand. And that is the thing that will create eventually the price. But in reality, I think that there's a lack of understanding of how important pollination is for making a good crop. I think most almond growers probably understand it pretty well, but we have been working in BeeHero providing pollination services to many different crops. And we see a pretty astonishing lack of understanding. People don't know how many bees they need, what time exactly they need to bring them in. They don't understand colony size and the effect of the health of the colony, and so on and so forth. And I think that when you don't really understand how much you need something, you don't value it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
If you understand what I'm.
Yeah. So I want to hear about how you, because obviously you saw an opportunity, you saw a problem, and then you also saw a potential for profit, that's how business works. I want to hear about how you did that, and then also I want to bring it back to, broadacre agriculture, and why I said before we hit the record button, does this really matter to the soybean farmer in Arkansas? And you said, I'll give you some things that'll scare you. Before you scare us, and I want to hear about that. Before we do that, I want to talk to you about my friends at Redox. My friends over at Redox, they've been sponsoring this program now since January 1st. Great folks. I went up to their headquarters in Burley, Idaho, and met them. Family company, been around for 30 years. They got a great product line that enables your crops to maintain what they call plant charge balance. I actually asked them what the hell this meant, because I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I'm an FFA kid. I'm a farm boy. Plant charge balance. Turns out that every plant that you have takes up nutrients, all of which have an electrical charge. It's either positive or it's negative, right? We all took chemistry. So plants will do whatever is needed to have an even balance of those charges. If a grower's fertility program creates an uneven charge balance, it means your plants work harder and therefore get stressed, which will compromise your yield. Redox Bionutrients combines 13 key carbon chemistries with biostimulants to achieve plant charge balance. Plant charge balance, all about a balanced plant. You want to learn more about this, you can go to redoxgrows.com. That's redoxgrows.com. Check it out. Good friends over there. Check it out. It's all about plant charge balance and a balanced plant. Okay. Answer me this. You saw a problem. Some people see it within more in your circles than in mine. And you said, I'm going to create this thing called BeeHero. And then I want you to tell me, because you're a smart guy, I can tell, if the potential customer for this is just a couple of beekeepers in the San Joaquin Valley, it's not a very good business plan. I have a feeling that you think this goes bigger. So the problem we've already discussed, declining bees, bee health issues, lots of environmental issues harming our bee population. You invented BeeHero. Tell me what BeeHero does and then why you think it'll catch on.
Right. So like we've been talking, the problem with bees disappearing is not that we're not going to have honey anymore, right? Honey is tasty, it's sweet, it's nice to have, but it's not a must-have. I think in any household we have other sweeteners as well, right?
We don't need bees for honey. We need bees to pollinate.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the main issue. And so beekeepers are not actually our clients. Our clients are growers that needs pollination services. Because what we do is provide precision pollination services. We try to create a lot more efficiency in the entire process, help beekeepers with the maintenance of their hives during the year. And I'll explain a little bit more about it in just a second. And then matchmaking, we do a lot of matchmaking between a specific hive and a specific acre based on this acre's needs, right? Depends on what crop we're talking about, specific variety, location in the world, weather, availability of other resources, and so on and so forth. I think one pretty staggering piece of information is that in the next 50 years, we're going to have to produce more food than what was produced in the last 10,000 years.
All right. I know. You've heard that soundbite 150 million times. Exactly. I disagree with that because our populations of humans are starting to almost decline. But anyway, we do have the hope of a better fed populace because of economics. So you and I can both agree on that. Main thing is, what we do know is we're not going to go backward. We're not going to eat less in the next 20 years. You know, in your foreseeable business future, 20, 30 years, we're probably going to be at least at about this consumption. That's where I am. You can go with 50% more, whatever. The point is we still need at least this much. And you thought I can help out by my customer is not the beekeeper. My customer is the farmer, producer, grower, and they need my services. Do they have a declining crop now? Are we suffering production losses now because of a lack of healthy bee populace?
It's something that is very difficult to prove if a lower crop season is because of a specific weather event or because of health issues in the bee industry. In some cases, it's easier to tie one cause with the end result. But it's not always very easy to.
It's hard to trace and say, I lost 8% of yield and it's because there weren't enough bees to pollinate. That's a hard one. I mean, you can go with water, you can go with fertility, weather. Bees are probably so far back that it doesn't get blamed. But on specialty crops, it might be more pointed.
Yeah. So, like I said, it's pretty hard to exactly trace the issue. I'm sure most of your listeners understand how many different factors come to play when you're talking about the final yield of a specific orchard or a field or whatever it may be. With our offering, because it is clear on a small scale, it is very clear that when you get bad bees or no bees, you're going to get less crop. Okay, a smaller crop. And it's not, by the way, it's not always just how many fruits you ended up with. sometimes the quality of pollination is also important. Like with apples, if you don't get sufficient pollination, you're going to get a deformed apple or smaller apple.
Right.
So on. So quality of pollination will generate more fruits, better fruits, by the way, with longer shelf life as well, which is also very important.
Yeah, that's something that most people wouldn't think of. So insufficient pollination might create ugly fruit. Insufficient pollination creates half fruit, that kind of thing. I hadn't thought of that. So that's a real thing.
Yes.
When you then looked at designing this business, back to BeeHero.
Right. So essentially
you said, I think our customer is a grower, producer.
Yeah. Yes. And essentially what we offer is an unprecedented amount of data and insight with regards to the actual pollination process. Yep. Because for most growers that contract with beekeepers and get bees on their property to pollinate, the bee boxes are usually white, but they're like a black box. You don't have any idea what's going on inside. You don't really have the ability to assess how good the bees that you got are, right? Most farmers tell me, well, if I'm afraid to get out of my truck, I think the bees are good. If I feel comfortable getting out of my truck, I feel like my bees are so.
Yeah.
Which is not a very accurate way to measure the.
That's just a matter of how many of them are swarming around the pickup truck, and that's their gauge. I don't know if that's accurate. So you said I can do better and give you a more, shall I say, quantifiable measurement tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with farmers that are testing their bees, it's usually not something that will change the quality of this year's crop, because once the bees have already been placed, you're not going to change them. You will be able to maybe not pay the full price for them if you find out that they're not as good as promised. But you're already getting a lower quality crop. And with what we do, essentially we have a sensor in every one of the hives that we work with. We partner up with beekeepers. We provide them with our technology. The beekeeper gets a sensor for every hive. It's basically 9 different sensors.
Yep.
This little thing, it has 9 different sensors.
By the way, if you're listening to the audio, most people, Itai, listen to the audio, don't watch the video. So if you're listening to the audio, he hold up something that's, I would call about the size of a silver dollar. Hold it up again. So he held up this thing. It's okay, the size of a large wristwatch, and vase. That thing goes in a hive.
Yeah,
and it ties to my smartphone. It ties to what's it tied to?
So it's connected to a gateway that also is out in the field. The gateway collects all the information from the in-hive sensor. Yep. Including the gateway itself is measuring some ambient measurements like temperature, humidity, some other stuff. We collect all this data, transfer it to our cloud, and then we run different algorithms, machine learning algorithms. Everybody likes to call it AI, so I'm going to say AI. It's a buzzword now. Right. Essentially, we're able to understand what's going on inside the hive. We're able to understand how big it is, how many frames of bees are in that hive, the performance of the queen, overall performance of the colony, if it's declining, and so on. And we're able to provide those insights on a pretty easy to use platform for the beekeeper. They have it on their smartphone, and they can see in every one of their yards what's going on, basically. And they can go treat the hives accordingly. And then based on those readings, we're also able to pick and choose the best hives for pollination day, right? So, and then once the hives are in the orchard, first of all, the grower has the confidence that, they know that we know exactly what the bees are looking like. We have a sensor in every one of those hives. We know how, we know their history, and we know how good they are for that specific activity that we're putting them to do. And so the grower also gets a platform where they can see in real time the pollination activity, right? The hive activity levels, how many bees are coming in and out of the hive every moment. how many flight hours during the day.
Silly question, Itai. The stuff you're monitoring, I mean, I presume that activity equals, meaning bee activity equals greater pollination. I know that you're probably thinking, well, this dumbass, of course. But how would I know? Does because you're monitoring movement and hours and durations, does that mean the field gets better pollinated? It presumably does, yes?
Yes. It increases the chances, if we want to be very technical here. The more activity of bees you have, the higher the chances are that your flowers are getting pollinated, right? We have a different sensor that we can put in the field upon request. It's a different service that can work together, but that sensor will measure the actual activity on the flowers, actual pollination being done on the flowers, on the trees at any point in time in the day. So we can provide the full package, and not just knowing how good the bees are, but also how good the pollination is going in real time. So we can do this or that or both of them together, which provides a lot of information to the growers, something that they've never seen before, right? And it provides, the transparency, like I said.
Yep.
Accountability, because now they know if something's going on, they have full transparency for that. They can hold us accountable for it.
So here's the question. I want to ask you this. You sell this to the farmer,
right?
And you say, if you become a customer of BeeHero, we're going to put these units on all these hives, and we're going to also help you place those hives, and we're going to monitor it to help you get the biggest productivity, pollination productivity. Sure. Do you have anything to do with the bees? Are you an intermediary on the bees as well, or is it just the technology that monitors the bees?
Right. So we don't own the bees. We partner with beekeepers that we vet, and those beekeepers install our technology in their hives.
Yep.
And at that point, we work together to make sure that the bees are doing well, developing as we expect, and so on and so forth. And not just that, we can see consistently that bees under our monitoring are bigger bees, bigger colonies.
Okay, so that's good. You have a track record. How long has BeeHero been a thing?
So we started BeeHero in 2017 back in Israel. Started working in the US in 2019. We are now the largest pollination provider in the world, covering almost 200,000 acres. Between the US and Australia are two of our main markets at the moment, but we do some other.
So the person that's a naysayer, let's say I'm an old grizzled beekeeper, and I've been working with this farmer for years. I take hives to all of these different fields.
Sure.
And he says, I think I'm going to start monitoring, and I don't mind getting my bees from you, but you're going to do it with this BeeHero. And he's going to say, what the hell are you doing? You think my bees are a problem? Do you have a problem where they get a little bit like put off? Like, are you questioning the quality of my bees and my pollination? Because I can see there being a little rub.
Yeah, there's definitely a rub in some cases. Not everybody likes it. Some people, they don't want to be followed, their tinfoil hats. And I can understand that. It's fine. But we have a perspective that, people that work at BeeHero, a lot of us are commercial beekeepers, or big farmers, people that have done those things. This is for beekeepers and farmers by beekeepers and farmers.
I got it. I like that angle. What about then the other angle that I'm thinking, I don't think I need your services in Indiana. I don't think my buddy Matt Miles down in Arkansas with his rice and his cotton and his corn and soybeans, and I don't know that he needs your services. Are you destined to play in somewhere in between Florida, Texas, and California because of the specialty crop?
Right. So just one more small point about the previous question. I just want to say that we realize that this product is not necessarily for everyone, except for maybe air and water. I don't know of anything that is for everyone.
Yeah, right.
And
By the way,
okay.
and by the way, I think when you're an entrepreneur, and that's why I told you this is the business of agriculture, and I always point this out. My audience loves it. Like I like that you talk about the money and the business and the customer base and all that. It's a business, you know. Yeah. The electric company gets every driveway going down the road, but they're a monopoly. So I agree with you. You don't need everybody in the world to be a customer, but I also am wondering. First off, you know, the fun part of when I said you get a little bit of a rub sometimes, because I can see where some of these beekeepers are going to say, well, wait a minute, you're just somebody getting in the way. You're just somebody that's not, but also they don't like the oversight. They don't like the fact that you're saying, you know what? What do we always say in big, broad acre agriculture? The best thing you can do is get an independent, analysis to make sure that the agronomist you're working with knows what the hell they're doing. I mean, there's always that thing. So I agree with that.
You're absolutely right. And yeah, and like I said, I don't think everybody is ever going to be our clients. We have a lot of clients. We've grown very rapidly over the last few years that we've been working.
Yeah.
And not just in California and the rest of the U.S. as well. Yeah, I think it's totally fine. We're okay with that.
Yeah. What about the answer then to the question, Itai? Do my neighbors in Indiana, do the soybean producers in Missouri, do the cotton producers in Arkansas, is this a concern for them? Or is this a specialty crop thing?
Yeah, so not every crop, like I said in the beginning, needs pollination, right? So corn growers definitely don't need to hire our services because they're not going to get anything from it, right? They're just going to pay money for pollination services that are going to do exactly zero stuff to their fields.
Yep.
Soybean is actually interesting. It's not historically been using pollination, as a standard. We've done quite a lot of research with some varieties, specifically in the warmer states. So I will talk about, let's say, Illinois, Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, the warmer states. Soybean is actually pretty attractive for bees, and presence of bees can be beneficial. You can grow your total crop between 15 to 30%, according to some research that was done. We've done our own research on it. We've found similar results. And it is pretty interesting, but you don't have to have bees.
Got it. What about, you started this 7 years ago. Where do you think this goes? First off, we hope that the bee situation, bee health is good. We don't want, in your business, it doesn't seem like is predicted on the demise of bees for you to be profitable. It seems like, I would say your business looks at, you're making bees, you're improving the pollination productivity. That's really what I think you're in the business of doing. Am I right? And then if that's the case, where does it go?
Yeah. So the way that we work at the moment, we try to bring efficiency, like you said, improving the efficiency of the pollination itself. Essentially, in I'll say most cases, because I don't want to be definitive, but in most cases, our services are not really that much more expensive, or sometimes they're going to be even cheaper than what the growers normally use to pay. And our beekeepers are able to make more money because we're paying according to the strength of the colony. We're essentially incentivizing the beekeepers to keep up in a really good way with their bees.
Yeah, maybe, like, I'm guessing in the old days, was it I just got paid per hive per day? And
just per pollination normally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I grew up in the dairy business, and you didn't just get paid by the number of cows you had. You got paid by the pounds of milk and then the components within the milk, the amount of protein, the amount of butter fat, and then also you had to make sure your bacteria count was below a certain level. So this all seems pretty reasonable to me. What about go ahead.
Excuse me. To that point, that's exactly the thing, because growers really didn't have an understanding, and there was no way to measure the output of a bee colony.
Yep.
Okay. It was very abstract, and now there is a way, and that's why we're changing slightly the way that we're doing things. It's not completely different than normal pollination services in terms of how it goes and how you get the pollination services and so on. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel everywhere, but yes, with all that ability and growers besides that, and I think you talked about it in that episode of ideas you should use and so on. Growers really know like the nutrients in the ground, and how much water they put, and how much spraying they did, and everything. They have numbers for everything except for bees. They just know, oh, I got 2 hives per acre, and that's it. That's where the knowledge ends. So, yeah.
What about then the geography, or where there are parts of the world that are so far behind agriculturally that this isn't even, I mean, my God, just getting water to a crop, or, maybe utilizing some form of mechanization is the biggest challenge they have. So this is a issue for modern agriculture, which happens in, half the countries on earth, let's say. Is that where you go? Or is it specialty crop in Australia, Israel, and United States, and then maybe a couple other countries, because they understand the bee problem? I'm wondering, does Mexico know they have a bee problem? Does Peru know they have a bee problem? I'm just wondering how pronounced of a bee problem awareness there is.
Yeah, I think there's a very big awareness for that issue.
Even if I went to Chile, or Peru, where papayas come from, or something like this, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're bringing up these specific 2 countries, because that's our next stop for BeeHero. Peru and Chile are pretty big in some crops like blueberries, avocados. Yeah. By the way, in Chile, some almonds as well. And they definitely have a bee issue there. And right now, because it's becoming so popular to plant blueberries, for example, in Peru, they really don't have enough bees to pollinate all the blueberries. And so, yeah,
Itai, I get it that I'm a dairy farm boy from Indiana, but you think I don't do my research? I know what happens in those other countries because I hear about from the specialty crop people here, because they're the ones that are dropping our stuff here.
You had me there.
I love the discussion. You're the most interesting beekeeper I've talked to so far today. But about ready to break out the beers and continue it on. So my questions then that I want to get to next, and this is about wrapping it up. What did we not cover? So we opened the thing by, does agriculture have a bee problem? And you said, yeah, but you're not going to pull the climate alarmist that the last polar bear is floating around on an ice cube right now in the Arctic, and all the stuff that the climate alarmists do. You're not pulling the fire alarm, hellfire and brimstone. Oh my God, we're all going to die. It's a problem. It's been managed. You're here fixing it. But when you look at it from a 30,000-foot view, where are we? Where do we go? Kind of take me down the road.
So I like to think of myself as a realist, and I guess that has some to do with the fact that I'm not, pulling the fire alarm. I think that there is a real problem. Okay. Yeah. And I do think that we need to take this into consideration. I mean, we look at just, if we talk about farmland over the last decade, over the last century, it didn't really, the amount of farmland that we manage globally didn't really grow over that period of time, very, very marginally. Yeah. Which means we don't really have a lot more farmland to utilize, or, just land that can become farmland. And we need to become a lot more efficient with our food production. And this is something that the U.S. is very good at. Other Western countries are very good at, but it comes at a cost. And we need to just make sure that we cover all of our bases, right? And specifically with bees, I think that there's a lot that can be done to promote the health of bees. So even if you're a farmer in Indiana that doesn't need bee pollination because you grow corn or bean or whatever it may be, understanding that your 2,000 acres of corn is somewhat bad for bees, and putting this little plot of land with a bee habitat on it, if just one farmer did that, it's negligible. But if everybody starts doing that, we're gonna see a much healthier bee population across the U.S. And we need to understand that bees are important for our biodiversity as well. There are some things around us that are being pollinated by bees that we don't consume. They're not part of the agriculture. They're just part of our view, part of our natural
and wildlife habitat and all that kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. And bees are extremely important for all of that.
For the ecosystem in general. Yeah, I think that. You're making me feel really good about my conservation land that has clover on it, all different types of clover, and
That's amazing. I'll give you another sound bite. There's this saying that Einstein once said that if bees disappear off the face of the earth, mankind only is going to have 4 more years to live. Right. So obviously, died a long time ago. We didn't see all the progress that we've made during these years, but yeah, it's just to show you how important those bees, these little creatures that most people are afraid of, really are.
No, I agree with you. I'm all about it. We had beehives on the farm when I was growing up, and a guy needs to come out there and take them and give us a little bit of honey, and it was definitely a hobby operation. But anyway, all right, his name is Itai Kanot. That's spelled Kanot, and the company's called BeeHero. So if you want to find out more about Itai, where do we find you?
You can go to our website. That's beehero.io. We're also on Instagram, LinkedIn. So, yeah.
I enjoy the discussion a lot. For a couple of years now, I wanted to get somebody on to talk about the bee issue, because I read the articles and I'm like, okay, and I put it on a stack over here of a topic I want to cover, and then I don't commonly come by. And of course, my favorite story about this, last one going out the door, is years ago I did an event for a California County Farm Bureau event. And the counties are huge out there. Farm Bureau events are big out there. And I got done talking, and I was on, standing off the side, and the guy comes up to me, and then he started chatting. And then I said, "What do you do?" He says, "I'm a bee farmer." I said, I didn't know there was such a thing. And then I breathed in. He said, "Yep." He said, "Well, you're an ag guy, so at least you get it." He said, "Every dumbass I run into says, 'Oh, you keep bees. Do you ever get stung?'" I'm like, "Well, that's the question I was just about to ask you." And he said, "Well, hell yes, I get stung. How can you not? You handle bees all day." Anyway, so his name's Itai Kanot, a company called BeeHero. I like talking about the bees. Maybe in a few years you can come back and talk about me again. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Till next time, thank you, dear listener, for being here. Please share this with somebody that can benefit from it. You know what? I got great listeners. Been around for 7 years, 350 plus episodes releasing every Monday. It's on Acres TV and YouTube. If you listen to the audio, I encourage you to go check out the video. Please subscribe. Doesn't cost nothing. Thanks so much for being here. Till next time, check out my friends at Redox, True Terra, and Pattern Ag. Till next time, I'm Damian Mason, and this is The Business of Agriculture. Hey, thanks for being here. This episode of The Business of Agriculture was brought to you by Pattern Ag. You've heard me talk about Pattern Ag because I think it's a pretty cool concept. New technology that allows you to predict the problems you're going to have and therefore treat them before those problems cost you money. What kind of problems am I talking about? Pests and disease. Things like cordon rootworm, sudden death syndrome, cyst nematode, and a whole bunch of other bad things that happen out there in the field that can cost you money. Guess what? Pattern Ag will let you find out ahead of time if the disease or the pest pressure is there, and therefore you're treating it before it costs you any money. What a great concept. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to learn more about their product, their technology, how it can make you money, save you yield, and also where you can find a rep that can come out there and do the work for you. Pattern.ag.